Hello and welcome to the Alpha Software Demo and Q&A webcast. I'm Dave McCormick, VP of Product here at Alpha Software. And today we are going to be talking about UX controls. But before we talk about that, and because I am flying solo today, if someone could just quickly put in the questions or chat window whether or not they can hear my voice and see my screen. So I'll make sure I'm actually giving this to a live audience. Okay, cool. Thanks very much. Appreciate it. All right, so exactly 2 weeks ago, we were talking about the various types of components that you can use when building out web and mobile applications in Alpha Anywhere. And the one component that we skipped over was the UX. So we talked about it a little bit. The UX, however, is one of the most important components in Alpha Anywhere. So we wanted to save that for a different series of webinars. And today we'll be covering the concept of controls in a UX. So we're going to be talking about we'll quickly review what a UX component is, because we do have some people who are brand new, very exciting. And we also are going to talk about what a component is, or not what a component is, what a UX component is, but what a control is in a UX component. And there are different kinds. We'll be talking about data-bound controls. We'll be talking about other controls. And defined controls. There's a lot of controls here. In fact, we'll be kind of a control freak today, I think. So we're also going to be talking about finding and favoriting controls and bookmarking them, if you want to, sort of two alternate ways to keep your work organized or to speed up the work that you're doing. And we'll be talking about setting values of controls using JavaScript. And we'll then take a deeper dive into the text box control. We'll look at the list control, one of the most powerful features of the UX, as well as the QR control, the code control, the advanced list search control, and one really interesting one, the Jitsi Meet control. This is a feature that lets you add video conferencing directly into your applications, and I think you'll find that part of it very interesting. So let's dive in. Let me pop over to my machine here and take a look at Alpha Anywhere. So here we are in Alpha Anywhere. And as I had mentioned before, 2 weeks ago when we were talking about web components, we went over all of these other web components, the grid and the image gallery and the app launcher and some of the others as well. The UX, however, is the one that's most commonly used nowadays for building web and mobile applications, especially for mobile applications, because it has some really good mobile features that the grid simply doesn't offer. Whereas the UX can work equally well on both web and mobile, and actually sometimes has some extra advantages in a mobile scenario if you're running under PhoneGap. We'll talk about that as well. When you create a new UX component, we do here, you could either start with a blank component or create one from scratch. And if I create one from scratch, you will see that the UX builder appears here. Now up here, sometimes this isn't the easiest interface for people to follow, especially when they're brand new. So I want to break this down a little bit. Over here in the UX, basically you've got, I'd say, three major sections, which would be UX, events, and code. But if you click within the UX into the controls section, this is where you actually start building out your application. Right here, you start out with a blank canvas and you can start dragging controls out into it. Where do you find those controls? Well, you find them down here in this list, or you find them up here in the add control list. Let's open one that's got a whole bunch of controls on it. So I'm going to go open this one, which I call the controls UX. And here I haven't added all of the controls. I've probably added about half the controls, maybe a third. So we've got things like text boxes, text areas, radio buttons. Let me just pop over into working preview and show you what we've got. And I haven't set all of these up, so some of them aren't working properly. But this is the text box control, which you use for entering text, the most basic of the controls. Text area, which is very similar, except of course you can expand it and have multiple rows. Drop-down boxes, radio buttons, checklists. You're all familiar with that. I won't even bother with that. Here are a few other kind of cool ones though. There's a signature capture control, which works also very well on mobile. You can just draw with your finger or with a stylus, or here on in a web environment, you can just do it with a mouse as well. And that can get saved into a database. We have the QR control, which I'm going to tell you a little bit later how to use that in your application. I'm skipping over JavaScript command window. I haven't fully figured this one out yet, so but I will. I'll get to the bottom of that. Slider control, we have the switch control, we have the spin list control, which would be more exciting if I filled it with data. But basically, it's line after line of data that you can go flipping through, basically. Somewhat similar to a drop-down list. We have the calendar control. We have the Google Map control, which requires you to get an API key from Google Maps in order for it to work correctly. The same with the Google Chart component. And we have ink. Ink is also a really neat control. Ink lets you basically draw in an area that's defined here by a bounding box. So if you can imagine, this whole area here is going to be where you'll get to draw and save your image. And this area here, which I can make bigger or smaller, kind of magnifies it down here. So if I wanted to just spell my name, I put a big D, and then I can move my box over here. So on. Not this isn't exactly a masterpiece here, but and so this is kind of cool. What's really specifically cool about it is that the defined degree of granularity that you have by adjusting the focus here. And this, of course, gets saved back into a database as well. There's an advanced list search, and we are going to cover that today. There are some audio players. There's also video players, audio recorders, video recorders. These, however, only work currently on a mobile application in which you're using Cordova or Alpha Launch. So I'm not going to get into those right now. We have the checkbox list, which is one I rather like. And it comes from a SQL data source, and you can choose records here. We have the enter code box, which we're going to get into today. This should look familiar if you've ever filled out a two-factor authentication sort of a situation. We have an integer value, which is a pain in the neck control if you're using it on desktop, but works great on mobile because it's really just meant to be tapped with your finger. If you wanted to put in 11, you can just do that. You didn't have to pop up a keyboard and fill it in. When you're typing, of course, it's probably just easier to use a keyboard, but on a mobile device, this sort of integer value thing seems to work pretty well. And we have logical checkboxes, and that's, like I said, about a third of all of them. So let's talk about sort of just overall what the differences are in the control types. Because as you scroll down here, you'll see that we have something called data controls. And those are things like those text boxes and text areas and even the QR code and so on. But we also have other controls, which are not specifically data bound. So this would be things like static text and images and things like that, but images that aren't being pulled from a database, although you can of course do database images, but not here, and that's one of the data controls. And then we have that's other controls, and then we have defined controls. Defined controls are these much more powerful pre-written controls that work with different parts of the UX. So for example, if you've inserted a list box that displays the data, say coming from a SQL data source, you can just add predefined buttons that will automatically navigate through that list, search that list, enter data in the list, and so on. So those are a good place to look when you're working with lists, is to go down to defined controls and look for the ones that deal with the list box. We've added recently a newish feature. I say recently, it's probably a little over a year old, at least, but it's over here in add controls. And this basically, and favorites. Favorites lets you take controls that you would like to use regularly and put them in a favorites list. So for example, if I'm in data controls and I'm going to say use the list box a lot, I might right click and add it to favorites. And now here it is, it's part of my list. And if there's only a few that I'm really working with a lot, that could be handy. I'm going to go ahead and remove that from favorites because I want to show you something else you can do. And that is if you have a particular control that you like say a label, here you can right click on it and add it to a bookmark or add a bookmark to it. And when it's in a bookmark, when you click the bookmark button, it lets you choose from that list. So really these are equivalent. Some people prefer to use the favorites dropdown. Some people prefer to use the bookmark controls. it's totally up to you. Or some people prefer to use neither of those features and just know where the controls are and pick them out themselves. All right. So let's go ahead and I'm going to unbookmark that. And let's start talking about specific controls. So a data-bound control is a control, as you might expect, that can take data. It can both read data and it can be used to write data. So a text box is a good example. When you open up a text box in a web application, that text box might be pre-filled with data from a database, may not, or it may accept data for you to type in that you want to save back into a database. This is true for all of the controls and data controls. So let's pop over and give you an example of that. Let's take a look at something really simple. This one. This one, I've got simply two text box controls. This one and that one. So now with these controls, there are ways of manipulating these using something called Action JavaScript, but I want to show you something really basic that you probably want to do very often, and that is either read or set the value of a control programmatically and in JavaScript. So in this case, let's say I've created, in fact, I have created this two text box layout, and I have set it up such that if I type in value, we'll say, and I submit that value, I can have it automatically fill in that value into text box 2. So basically, I have a script that says whenever I change the value here, take that value, read it, and then write it to text box 2. You're going to want to do something like this probably pretty often when you're building an app. So let me show you how to do that, because it's not always super intuitive the first time. To set it up, basically what I did was on my control, I went into the control properties. Here I can control things like what it looks like and its font size and its color and things like that. There's a lot of other stuff that you can add to it. But I'm going to go down and take a look at the JavaScript section. So these are the JavaScript events. One of the JavaScript events that you get with a text box is the onChange event. And that fires, in other words, it runs the script that you have attached to it whenever you make a change to text box 1. So let's take a look and see what I put into that text box. For a lot of you, I'm sorry, this is going to be review, but we are going to get into other stuff later, which I think you'll find cool. So the way we did this is by using some component methods. So this is JavaScript here, and we have a component method called getValue, which takes the parameter of the name of the control that the value is stored in. And we have one called setValue, which sets a value to a control that you specify here. So all I did is I just wrote it so that whenever the onChange event happens, it takes the value out of text box 1 and writes it into text box 2. So how did I know how to do all of this JavaScript stuff? Well, I didn't. So what I did was I just used the helping tool. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that. And I'm going to show you how that works. Down here, there's a link called Insert UX Component Method. And you're going to probably use this pretty often. If you click on that, it gives you a list of all of the methods. There's a bazillion of them, so you're going to want to filter them. And you could do that right here in this box. So to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to start with setting the value. So set value. And here's the first method right here, set value. And it's filled it in for me. So now I want to set the value of this text box too. So all I have to do here is double click here to select that text. And I'm going to press the space bar and watch what happens. This pop-up text appears. I can right click on that pop-up text and I can select the value that I'm interested in. I want to set the value in text box 2, so I'm going to choose text box 2. Okay, I don't need to worry about honoring change events. This is going to happen automatically. It has to do with data validation. Not something we're going to worry about here at the moment. So I'm going to delete that because it's an optional parameter. And then for the value that we want to set it, well, we want to set it to the value of text box 1. So how do we do that? Well, we need to get the value of text box 1, and we do that again in the Insert UX Component method. So I'm going to click on that and say get value. And I'm going to choose that. And just like I did before, I'm going to select it, just hit the space bar, And now I can select which control I'd like to pull the value out of. I want to pull it out of text box 1. Whoops, come on, text box 1. There we go. Now, for some reason, it's put in double semicolons. That's not right. So I'm going to actually pull one of those out so that I don't get a syntax error. And I'm going to go ahead and save that. And if I did it properly, it should still work as it did before. Preview, blah, 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 and there it is. All right, cool. All right, so setting the value from one text box and putting it into another text box, not particularly exciting, but let's take it a little further and make this kind of useful. Let's go ahead and instead use a QR control. So I've created another UX called QR generator, and on it, I've put two controls. I've put a text control, which I've just renamed to QR code. So that's exactly what we had in the previous example. And then instead of a text box, I put here a QR code, which again can be found down here in Data Controls. Scroll down and show you where that is. And really, I've written the exact same script like I did just a moment ago. If I take a look at the onChange event for this particular one, you'll see all I've done was the get value to pull the value out of my QR code field, and the set value to take that value and place it into the QR code field. So the QR code, the actual QR code control. So there's a text box called QR code, and there's a QR code field called QR code 1. Now, when I set this, it doesn't show it as a number, it shows it as a QR code, as you'd expect it to. So let me just show you how that works. Let's go over to Working Preview. And if anyone has a phone handy, you can actually give this a shot to make sure it's working. So let's go https://www.alphasoftware.com and enter. So I don't know if someone wants to hold their phone up to that. Maybe I'll do it, make sure it's working. Their camera, and they should see that that's recognized as a QR code. And if you tap on that, it should take you right over to the Alpha Software site, which it's doing for me. So that's cool. Excellent. All right, and it's working for you guys too. Wonderful. Now, so we've got those two things working, and that's the QR code field. Now, this is kind of fun because you can use it to generate QR codes that maybe if you're going to print out that form or something like that, or have it displayed on the screen so that someone can hold up a phone and it can bring them to a particular website. You can even have it go to a particular Alpha Anywhere application, and you could right there in the query string up at the top, you could specify certain parameters such as the person's user ID or something like that. So that's all things that you could do with that QR code generator. Moving along, so I'm not going to save any changes to that. Let's go a little bit more involved, and let's take a look at getCode. getCode is kind of a cool one. So here I've created I've created two buttons and one data control called enter code. And this enter code is, like I showed you before, one of those things that you use in two-factor authentication, 2, 3, 4, for example. What's interesting about this particular type of control is that it has a couple of options that actually has one particular option that regular controls don't have called the shake option. It's actually a shake method. So if I show you what that means is if I go into shake, if I go into my shake button, you'll see that I have gotten the ID for the control, the enter code thing, and I've invoked the shake method. What does shake do? I'll show you. Shake, as you've seen before, actually shakes the box back and forth. And that's often accompanied by something that clears out the box. So for example, if you had typed in a two-factor authentication code that was wrong, it may do this, showing you that it's wrong, and then clear it back out again. So that's just something that you can do here with the code box, and I think that's actually a rather nice box to use. All right, so now let's get a little bit more involved. Let's go take a look at a list control. And here we're going to go here. We'll take a look. I already have a list set up already. Now, a list control is sort of the heart of interacting with data in a UX component. You can get the data from a variety of sources. SQL is a very popular one, but you can also get it from API calls, from built-in static data. You can pull in stuff from Excel files, JSON files, CSV files, all kinds of things that you can then use, see, and manipulate right on the screen. In this particular case, I chose to use our Northwind database. And the way I did that was by choosing SQL, first of all, going into connection strings, and choosing the Northwind database. If you didn't have Northwind available, there would be a link here, or actually a link, I think, here when you say create a new connection string to actually build it for you. So that's just a database that's built into Alpha Anywhere that you can use, and we use it quite often. Then we say, how do we want to define the SQL query? We want to get fields from a particular table as opposed to, say, doing a join or something like that. The table here has got name, address, city, state, zip are the fields that we want. And then if we pop over into, not to fields, but into list layout, you'll see I've selected just a couple of fields here to display. And if I say preview list, you'll see what that would look like. There's just the contact name, the city, and the country up there on the field. Now, there's ways of adding search and stuff to a list. And I'm not going to go into lists in great detail because there are a lot of videos, there's a lot of documentation on lists. So we've covered this quite a lot. But of course, if you have questions at any time, always send them to guides, GUIDES at alphasoftware.com. And if you have questions about lists or anything like that, we can get sorted out. I'm going to go ahead and close that. And now I've added another component, another control here called the advanced list search. And I found that here under, I found it under other controls. You know what? I don't have to guess because all I have to do is go to add a control and I can filter. I'm going to say advanced list search. And there's that component. An advanced list search lets the user do all kinds of interesting things. So let me just open that up. Sorry, let me open it up in working preview or live preview and show you some stuff that you can do with it or how I've defined it. Now, if you recall, this has got a country field as part of my data. So I might want to be able to search by country. So to do that when I'm using advanced list search is I can add a new search field. And then it lets me choose which field I want to use. Now, I only have country here listed because when I set up the advanced list search, that's the only field I included. I could have also included contact name or city. I just chose not to. So I'm going to choose country. And I could have set up a form where you typed in the name of the country, but instead I thought it'd be better just to use these buttons. So let's say if I wanted to add, if I wanted to choose or click on Germany, I click on Germany and I say run query, it'll run that and just pull back records from Germany. What's also neat about lists, advanced list search, is that each user can have their own set of saved searches. So they may have something which they've set up which is really complicated, like I only want to see customers who've purchased within the last 30 days and have spent more than $100 in Germany, right? And you might say, well, I'm going to run that list often. I might want to save that. So there's a possibility of saving that here. To do that, you have to set up something in project settings where it basically keeps track of everybody's saved queries. I don't have that set up. So if I click on it, it should give me an error. It does. And it says you have not specified a repository table. Please go to Project Properties dialog and configure the settings in the repository table. Just so you know where that is. If I were up here in Project Properties, click on that, I could find that here. I just scroll down to the repository section. Oops, right here. And I would fill all of that in. I tell the table where I want to allow people to save their things, all kinds of stuff that would go along with that, what their user ID is and things like that, or what their user ID field is. So that's something you can do with advanced search. It's nice. It's only available to you. There's a caveat. It's only available to you if you're using a SQL data source. It does not work for other types of sources. It doesn't work for static or anything like that. So it's really meant for SQL. so let's see what we've got here. Question, adding favorites or bookmark controls. How do I reorder the list so it makes sense to me? And how do I make sure that I do not lose these lists with a new build or version updates? Those should be saved even when you update the version. I don't think you're going to have a problem with those being overwritten. But in terms of how do I reorder them, you know what? I haven't tried. So let's try adding a couple bookmarks. Bookmark, add bookmark. And let's see, do I have any possibility of dragging them around? Doesn't look like I do. Well, let's try the same with favorites. Although I have to be honest, I don't have high hopes here. Let's take a look though. Data controls, let's say I wanted to make a text box a favorite. And let's say I wanted to make a list of favorite. Now I have these two. Can I click and drag them to the right positions? I can't, but that would be actually kind of a cool feature when I think about it. If that's something you'd like to see added, go ahead and send us an email to guides@alphasoftware.com. We'll put in the feature request for you. Another thing I'd like to point out is that you can actually point out feature requests to us at any time. If you go up into the help menu and you say send an enhancement request, it shows you exactly how to describe what you're trying to do, and it can email it off to it automatically, or it can use a browser-based email account to send it to us. That then goes into a system that we use for tracking and prioritizing enhancements. So that's kind of cool. I just want to make sure that everyone knows about that. Can bookmarks be saved in separate projects? I don't know. I will find out the answer to that, and I will get back to you. So just write that one down. Actually, let's see if this is the case. I now have two bookmarks in here, right? Oops, I killed them. Let me put my bookmarks back. Add, save. Nothing like trying it. All right, let's go in here and I'm going to say a new. Sorry, I want a new project. Got to click the right button. All right, test. Let's create a new UX component. And if we did it right, or if it works the way that we would hope it will, web components, create new. Yeah, web component, UX, blank. Let's go into controls. No, it looks like it's project by project. How do I move it from one place to the other? That's another good question. Let me write that one down. That's why I love these webinars. We get such good ideas. Move bookmarks. Reorg bookmarks. Thanks very much. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and close that down. So I've shown you the advanced list search and the code control and the QR control and the list control and the text control. There's one more control I want to show you, and that is the Jitsi meet control. And actually, I'm sorry, I also want to take you on a little tour of some of the other predefined controls as well before we get into that. So let's pop back to my other project. And go back to my default web project. And here are all my controls again. And let's just do a new one. Okay. And now here we have data controls. So as you get to the end of data controls, there are so many data controls that there's actually a more button that lets you see the rest of them. This is why it's kind of advantageous instead to use that add control button, because you can see them all in one place without them without having to click on additional buttons to find them. So I showed almost all of these. I did include a tree control, but I didn't set it up, and nor did I do it with a map or a chart. The code one I've shown you, but there's some other interesting ones. The integer value, I showed you that one. Logical checkbox, I showed you that. But we have things like a semicircular number display. That's kind of cool. The ability to do spreadsheet-like inputs. There's a star rating. So if it's between 1 and 4, it'll give you the right number of stars. There's there are some video players. Many of these require Cordova, just so you know, so they have to run in a mobile environment. and there's a weather control. And then down here, we have these things called define controls. I did talk about that before. So for example, if you wanted to add functions to your list control to for new records and things like that, and you didn't set them up at the time, or you didn't set them up with the Genie, you can do that by adding the controls right here and then telling it what list box you want it to apply to. All right, enough of that. Let's pop down into other controls and let's go find that Jitsi Meet control, because I think this will be neat. Here's Jitsi Meet. Okay, so here are the other controls, and they're called other controls because they're not specifically bound to a data source. Like you don't, if I put in static text, that is not a variable that I can access directly in JavaScript and manipulate. I could change the text by finding out the ID of the control and using JavaScript to set its inner HTML value. The same with an image, but these are just typically controls that are set once and forget it. They're not meant to really be interacted with. And that's true of almost everything here. Now, Jitsi Meet you do interact with, but again, it doesn't save the data back into a database. It's more of a presentation type of control. So here's Jitsi Meet. I'm going to click on that. And here I can actually set up right in my application the ability to do a meeting. I'm sure I haven't set up nearly enough, so if I go to live preview, it's almost certainly going to complain. And the first thing it says is, hey, you need to go into project properties and check the box called include Jitsi Meet library. So that loads in the JavaScript pieces that you would need. We normally exclude those because if you're not using it, there's no point in including it. It would take up space and bandwidth that you didn't have to use. So I'm not going to show you how to set this up. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to rely on Bob Moore, who's put together a really fantastic video, which I'm going to show to you right now. But of course, I'm also here the whole time in the background to take your questions. So you can go ahead and type those questions in. So without further ado, let me bring in Bob Moore, our VP of Mobile Technology, and show him, and he will show you how Jitsi Meet works. All right, excellent. It looks like there are a few questions. Let me just go back to my presentation here. But not a lot. So you can go ahead and type them into the questions box of the GoToWebinar control panel. All right, so the first one is, will this work with mobile apps or just with web apps? Well, I think actually by the time the video ended, it's clear that it does work with both of them, which is cool for Jitsi Meet. Another question was, okay, does Jitsi Meet use like if you have an alpha cloud hosted application and you want to use Jitsi Meet, is that data going to go through Alpha Cloud, and is it therefore going to count against compute units or bandwidth or something like that? And the answer is no. When it's set up, it's the server is not the Alpha Cloud server. It uses a Jitsi server, so it's directly from that client to the Jitsi server to the other clients that are connected, and it does not go through Alpha Cloud. So there's no charges or anything like that which get incurred. Let's see what else we've got here. I've pasted a link to this video in the chat window if you guys want to grab it and watch it later, but we will try to get it up on YouTube as well. So that's about it, it looks like, for questions. Hey, thanks everyone for showing up, and we look forward to seeing you next Wednesday at our next Alpha Q&A webcast. Until then, take care and stay well. Bye-bye.